Thank you very much for coming to this important meeting of Audit and Scrutiny. Are there any apologies, Andrew?
Yes, Convener, the only apology that's been notified to me is for Councillor Hume.
Right, that's fine, thank you. And item 1 in the agenda is the declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything to declare under declarations of interest? Are we okay? Right, thanks very much. So now we go on to item 2 in the agenda, which is the Strategic Governance Framework Annual Review and Refresh, which I think Katrina is going to talk us through this. So I'll just pass over to you, Katrina, just to get going. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and afternoon, everyone. Members can't speak today, may remember approving the local code of governance at the panel in February last year, and that contains a list of elements and mechanisms to demonstrate how the council actually complies with the national good governance framework. We need, however, to make sure that those governance arrangements remain up to date, and to that end there's an annual review. In her role, Susan Laurie has recently completed that annual review, and if it's all right with you, Convener, I'll pass over to Susan just to talk you through the review approach and the revised framework that's outlined in the report.
Right, Katrina, thanks. Thanks, Susan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Convener, and thanks, Katrina. As Katrina said, this is the annual review of the the strategic governance framework. It follows on from the annual governance statement, which was at the panel in June this year, and it's a key piece of evidence for the annual governance statement in terms of providing that sound evidence base for all of the mechanisms and elements that the council has in place to demonstrate good governance. So I'll just pick out a few highlights from the report. On page 6, the background really just highlights the general information about the framework which the council complies with, the SIP for delivering good governance and local governance framework. And paragraph 1.3 is just a reminder of the role of good governance in terms of the council's ability to deliver on that long-term ambition set out in the plan for North Lanarkshire, while ensuring that that is underpinned with control and the management of risk. The delivering good governance and local government framework, the national framework, requires all councils to test their governance arrangements against 7 principles and 21 sub-principles, and these are detailed in the appendix, and I'll come back to them. So in paragraph 1.5, it's just a wee reminder that in practice, governance comprises a large range of things, whether that's structures, strategies, policies, plans, frameworks, systems, processes, rules, codes, procedures, cultures, values that are used to direct and control and manage the local authorities' operations and activities. So we just call them elements and mechanisms because it's just a shorter and easier way to refer to everything that we're talking about in here. So all of those elements and mechanisms were on that strategic governance framework that Katrina referred to that were approved at the panel meeting in February 2020. We provided an interim update in September 2020 to say that a review was underway of all of those elements to make sure they were up to date and on a review programme, and if they weren't, then they were to be on a review programme and reported to the relevant committee. So that review programme is now complete. And if I take you to section 2 of the report, it really just a reminder of the good governance framework and the role in terms of ensuring that the council is able to ensure its business isn't conducted in accordance with the law and proper standards, but public money being safeguarded, properly accounted for and used economically, efficiently and effectiveness. So the appendix that's attached to your report today is in 2 parts. Appendix A just lists the national system of principles that the council complies with in terms of good governance. And Appendix B lists all of the council's elements and mechanisms which form the council's local code of governance, i.e. the strategic governance framework, against these 7 principles and 21 sub-principles. This has been reviewed by the corporate management team and updated by heads of service as appropriate in the last 4 months. And as I said, it's a key piece of evidence that informed the annual governance statement. Paragraph 2.6 of your report just highlights the RAG status that has been applied to Appendix B. So in conducting the review, each of the elements was reviewed to assess, was it up to date? Was it up to date enough? Had it considered all of the recent changes or legislation that it needed to? And the RAG status really just identifies which have been updated, and which are on a review programme. There are no reds because during the process for review, all were identified and added to the review programme. So you'll see that where there's a commitment to have a review during 21-22, there's also a date or a committee cycle applied to it. There are a few ambers, but most are green because they're already on the programme of work for review for 21-22 to be updated and reported to committee. Paragraph 2.7 is just a reminder, obviously, that the Audit and Scrutiny Panel have a key role in terms of the independent assurance of the governance of the Council in this respect. So the next steps really is just to keep the strategic governance framework under review, and we've also introduced some improvements as detailed in paragraph 2.9. So for each of the elements in Appendix B that are being reviewed and reported to committee, the author, the heads of service of those reports are required to provide an assessment of the effectiveness of the particular element or mechanism that they're updating, a summary outlining any changes since the last change made to that particular element or mechanism, and the role of that element or mechanism in supporting the successful delivery of the plan for North Lanarkshire. And paragraph 2.10 just provides some small information about the work underway to try and bring in some quantitative performance measures to support the strategic governance framework next year and the annual governance statement therein. So I wasn't planning on going into the appendices in any great detail. Happy to answer any questions if I can. So I'll just hand back to you, convener, for the recommendations, if that's okay.
Thank you, Susan. That's very comprehensive. Have we any questions? Can I maybe just lead with one question, Susan, if I could, on page 34. Page 34, just when I was reading it, the corporate anti-fraud policy, which is actually is amber. You know, I'm glad to see there's no reds and there's a lot of greens, which is great. That one's in as amber, and normally there's a conclusion, you know, when it's to be reported, when it's concluded, but that one seems to be, the way I read it, seems to be quite open-ended. There's no date for it to be concluded or reported. Can you just have a wee look at that one for me?
The owner of that particular element mechanism is Ken, and he's on the call, so perhaps Ken might be able to give you an update in that respect.
Right, Ken, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, I mean, that's been delayed because it's really pressures arising from COVID. We will be providing an update with a specific time frame for the review of that policy as part of the follow-up work, the follow-up report that will be coming to the panel at the end of the month. So I haven't got the papers to hand that are prepared for that, but the panel will be updated on a deadline for that at the end of this month.
Right, Ken, that's good. Thank you very much. Tracy, was that just you letting us know that Councillor Valentine's having problems getting in, or did you have a question?
Yeah, it was that, but I see he's on now. Yeah, I do have a question. I haven't put it in the chat yet. See, Tom's in before me, so I'm happy for Tom to go first, and then I'll come back.
On you go. We'll let Tracy in after you.
Sorry,
it's okay. Well, you're on the chat bar, Tom. So Tracy's going to come in after you. So if you go in first, if you've got a question.
I've got two questions. One is on page 23, engaging comprehensively with institutional stakeholders. Has the council got a policy of what it communicates, if anything, to community councils? Community councils are defined as the lowest level of local government, and is there a comprehensive policy in what automatically goes to community councils, for instance the annual budget and things like that? And my other question is just simply, can we get updated on the three red points on the RAG list?
Sorry, where were the red ones, Tom?
Well, there's one on page 20. There's one on page 45, climate strategy, updating there, and one on page 63 about the home workers policy and the digital skills policy.
Right. That's okay, Tom. They're ambers rather than reds. They're ambers rather than
sorry,
red.
yeah, ambers.
Right.
And the other one is the community councils.
Right, thanks. Susan, are you happy to answer there, or will we bring Ken in?
In terms of the community councils, I can certainly find out that information and provide that back to the panel once I find that information out. In terms of the updates on the items that you've asked for, I can certainly ask the owner of each specific element or mechanism to provide an update back to the panel.
Thanks, Susan. Ken, you want in there?
Yeah, on the carbon climate change issue, the panel may recall that at the last meeting prior to the summer, they asked for a report from management on how the council was preparing and progressing its preparations and around net zero. So there is a report going to come to the panel at the end of September from the relevant head of service, which will hopefully provide Councillor Johnson with some assurance as to how management are progressing that. So that will be the meeting at the end of this month.
Right, Ken, thank you. Are you okay with that, Tom?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, right, thanks very much. Tracy?
Thanks, Sandy. So I'm new to this panel, as everybody knows, so please excuse what's probably going to be a very silly question. But I'm assuming the RAG, that's all internal, so it's all with internal officers that provide that information and rate it red, amber and green. Am I right in thinking that? And if that's the case, it looks as though we're absolutely up to date with everything. Tom mentioned the amber ones. There is one red which I was trying to find there in the meantime, and I can't find it. Tom also touched on the community councils. I had a slightly different question to that, but I suppose it's similar. Is there any thoughts to getting customer feedback on each strand here, each department here, to see what their thoughts are? Because it's all very well and good saying that we're all up to date things, but they're actually our clients, so are they feeling the same? Excuse me if that's a silly question.
Susan, are you, or Ken?
I can answer some of those questions. In terms of the feedback from customers and clients, it's certainly something we can look at to introduce to the process moving forward. It's not something we ask of the public just now in terms of the strategic governance framework, but it's certainly something we can look at moving forward. I don't remember seeing any reds. They were just ambers. And in terms of the allocation of the red and amber and green, while the heads of service and the corporate management team reviewed the list of elements and mechanisms and provided the information as to when things would be updated, I allocated the red, amber, green on an independent basis based on that criteria that you see in the paragraph in the report. So it wasn't necessarily the heads of service assigning their own RAG colour. It was an independent process that did that.
Thanks, Susan. Are you okay? Yeah, on you go, Ken. Yeah, Ken.
Yeah, really, just for the benefit of members, it's really worth reminding that the kind of independent assessment of the council's compliance with the framework is something that falls to internal audit to comment on, both in our annual opinion, but also we do generally at least one substantive piece of work focusing on compliance with elements of the code each year. I think our most recent report was in March this year, where we looked at elements E, F and G from memory, with generally positive conclusions, albeit some recommendations which are reflected in part in the updated actions since then and the ongoing assessment. So there is that degree of independent assessment. I think the only other observation I'd make is that whilst customer feedback is clearly important for some elements of the council's services and how it's performing, there's quite a lot of the elements here really address issues which, to be perfectly honest, members of the public from outside the organisation would not be particularly well placed to judge. So I think it's a balance, and I think obviously Susan's given a commitment there to look at how we reflect on customer experience throughout the council's performance management arrangements. But as I say, the internal audit work should hopefully give the panel some assurance that the management assessment is not wildly out of kilter with what we consider as appropriate.
Thanks, Katrina.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit of context in line with what Ken was just saying there as well. So when Susan was presenting the report, you know, she said in the elements and mechanisms, that's just a nice easy term that we use, but within that there's lots of different kinds of governance in there, and some of which is internal. It's how we manage, it's what our processes are, and unless we were redesigning them, then we wouldn't go out and speak to the public about them. It's just day-to-day business. But the strategy element is absolutely key, as you said, Councillor Carragher, and there are a number of those rows already. Then there will be some form of consultation with service users and citizens as those strategies are being developed. But it hasn't been consistent, and part of Susan's role, we picked this up towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, and the templates that are used in that communication aspect is now drawing report authors and people who are developing the strategies to do that very thing and think about if they should actually be going out and consulting service users on it. So it's early days for that. As Ken says, you'll probably pick that up as part of audits. But yeah, it's a very good point, and it's definitely something that's on our radar. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, and thanks, Linda, for your comment in the chat bar. Thank you. Tracy, there's no reds, Tracy. Sometimes in the light, the amber can sometimes look like a red. I had to double check there. I thought I'd missed something.
Yeah, apologies for that. I had a look
No,
again.
it's
I'm
all
sure
right,
I saw a red, so just
absolutely not a problem.
apologies. I'll withdraw that. But thanks very much for the comments on that. You know, I'm learning here as well, so thank you.
Oh, we're all learning, Tracy. We're all in the same boat. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Okay, if we go to, we're being asked to there's 4 notes and 1 approved, so I'll just quickly run through. Note the contents of this report in the company appendix. Note the work to review and refresh the strategic governance framework and ensure each of the elements and mechanisms listed therein are up to date on a review programme to be updated at an appropriate interval and reported to the relevant committee. Approve the refreshed strategic governance framework. Note the role of the Audit and Scrutiny Panel in respect of the strategic governance framework in terms of providing independent assurance to the Council and those charged with governance on the adequacy of the Council's risk management framework and internal control environment, and note the next step. So we're all fine with that? Good, thank you very much. So we now go on to item 3, which is page 65 from memory. Page 65, and Elaine is going to take us through this one. Elaine, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much, convener. So, oh, hang on. I'm having technical difficulties here. Right. So, yes, today the unaudited accounts are being brought to the panel to give you the opportunity for scrutiny. They were previously circulated to panel members on the 30th of June following submission to Audit Scotland in line with the statutory timescales. I'm happy to say the external audit performed by Audit Scotland is now well underway and progressing well. Members should note that the audited version of the accounts will be presented to panel members once the audit is complete, and the date's still to be confirmed with Audit Scotland, but expected to be during October at this stage. So as usual, I'll present the accounts to you today. I'll give you a summary of the key points to note, and then I'll pass back to the panel for any questions. Fiona Carney, who many of you will have seen at previous meetings, is with me here again today, I'm glad to say. Fiona has responsibility for putting the accounts together and will be able to help me out with any more detailed questions that might arise today. So first of all, it's really important for me to emphasise the complexities surrounding the COVID-related issues, and in particular the funding that we've received and subsequent accounting treatment of these funds that have meant that the preparations and completion of the financial statements were really particularly challenging this year. However, we did have and continue to have robust processes in place, and this combined with hard work and professionalism of many officers across the council ensured that we produced a complete set of accounts within the statutory timescales. So moving on to the accounts themselves, I'd draw your attention first of all to the management commentary, and that gives a really comprehensive summary of the key aspects in the accounts, as well as setting out a summary of the movement on general fund balances, which is arguably the most important figure in the accounts. The management commentary also gives an overview of the financial strategies within which we operated during 2021. In addition, and probably most importantly for 2021, the management commentary really tells the story of our journey as the impacts of COVID emerged during the year, and it gives some key highlights on the council's response, as well as an overview of the impact of COVID on financial planning over the year, which included a constantly shifting funding landscape and shifting cost estimates as restrictions came and went, and then in some cases came back again. All of this was tracked and recorded in a way that meant we could provide the information presented to you in the accounts today. And the changing landscape ultimately led to the council setting a core budget in March for 21-22 with a separate COVID budget which was established over the summer, the outcome of which will be reported to Finance and Resources Committee at the end of this month. So in relation to this, the management commentary really sets the scene to bring context to the figures that are presented in the financial statements. Also worthy of note, I would suggest, is the fact that the council paid out almost 70 million to support individuals and businesses through the pandemic, but as these were classed as agency payments, the amounts are not shown in the accounts. So moving on to the statements themselves, the council's general fund balance reported a surplus for the year of 68.350 million. When we add this to brought forward reserve balances from 1920, it brings the general fund reserve now to 116.751 million. This balance has been carried forward into 21-22, and it's made up of 71.858 million of committed resources, which can be split between COVID commitments of 36.065 million and regular service expenditure commitments, which total 35.793. So the breakdown of the service expenditure commitments is given as part of the management commentary at page 14 of the accounts, or page 85 if you're working off today's agenda pack, and later in note 27.1, which is in page 133 of the agenda pack. And this later note shows how the balances have moved since the 1920 accounts were reported. As reported to Finance and Resources Committee throughout the year, a balance was to be set aside at year end to cover the estimated requirements for the Change Management Fund, and the balance held for Change Management now sits at 22.042 million, and that reflects the estimated level of one-off costs that will allow the council to deliver already approved savings. So by setting this funding aside, we've ensured that all our future plans in relation to savings are affordable. Also within that general fund balance of just over 116 million is a contingency reserve of 8 million, which is held for unforeseen events and emergency purposes. The contingency reserve now represents less than 1% of our net budget, but because of our well-established approach to financial planning and good track record on delivery of approved savings, I believe that 8 million remains an appropriate level. So that leaves an unallocated general fund balance of around 14.8 million, and that provides a further buffer moving forward against future risks and uncertainties. Turning next to the housing revenue account, it returned a surplus of 13.307 million and increased HRA reserves to 27.453, 24.6 of which is committed. A further 1.47 million has been set aside for contingency purposes within the HRA, leaving an unallocated balance of 1.4 million. Again, there's further detail on the committed resources within note 27.2 of the accounts. Some other main points that I would note beyond the main financial statements include, firstly, pensions and liabilities. The net pension liability disclosed in the accounts is a projection. It's based on a range of assumptions and an annual estimate. A full review of the fund is carried out by actuaries every 3 years, and the next valuation date is due to take place in March 23, which means it will take effect from financial year 23-24. Well, we say every year that the figures are very volatile and can fluctuate year to year between each valuation periods. But the main thing to note is that the pension fund liability is an accounting entry only, and it doesn't impact on the general fund. The most recent triennial valuation was completed at March 2020, with this showing a funding position of 106%. So, and no change at that time was recommended to the employer's contribution rate, which remains at 19.3%. The next point I would highlight is on the group accounts. The council's group accounts adds a further 135.4 million of net assets to the council's single entity position. So this is after consolidation of council subsidiaries, joint ventures and associate companies. And there's a diagram on page 156 of your papers, which shows all of these that are considered as part of the group accounts position and the basis on which they have been consolidated. Moving on to equal pay, you'll see on page 124 that a further 151,000 was paid out during 2021, which means that total payments of over 130 million have now been made since the first claim settled in 2006-07. The provision now sitting on the balance sheet is 5.6 million, and that's expected to be sufficient to cover all existing outstanding claims and relevant employer pension contributions. So I'm going to stop there. I hope I've given you a fair overview of the main points of note in the accounts. I'm happy to take questions that any panel members might have today, or alternatively, if there's anything specific you want to know more about, I'm equally happy for you to contact me after the meeting for a more detailed response to be prepared. Thank you, convener.
Thanks very much, Elaine. As usual, very competent explanation you've given, and generally the figures I think are quite encouraging. There's nobody on the chat bar at the moment, so can I just go in with a couple of questions? It was just for I should know what this is, Elaine, but I'm not sure. On page 72, you talked about the pension fund earlier on there. But the surplus at 29 million compared to 100, which is a reduction of 168 million from the previous year, and this is due to the actuarial valuation of the council's share of pension scheme liability. Can we dig into that a wee bit more so as I can get a better understanding of exactly what that is and how that's worked out? Or do you want to maybe come back to me on it?
I think that's a very complex subject, convener, and I would like to come back to you on that if you would.
Right, that's okay.
Give me time.
If I can speak to somebody, that's doing it at the sharp end, that it would be useful just for my understanding. The other thing I always have tend to have qualms about the property valuation, because when you read the newspapers and everything, you tend to find that property values, for the most part, have gone down. But I understand, of course, that the council property, the council houses, are the major portion probably of the property value, and in many cases, probably some of these houses will have gone up, you know, in value. But when I read in page 83, I think it is page 83 on North Lanarkshire properties, they're talking about a material reduction in rental income. So there's, you know, I think it's something 1.4 for council houses and 1 for outside other properties. And, you know, when you see this material reduction in rental income from NL properties, you think to yourself, are we safe in keeping these property values very much, you know, as they are? Because, you know, I just wonder, you know, if the property assets need to be revalued downwards, what impact is that going to have in the council's finances? So it's really just the property side, if we could just touch on that, if that's possible.
Take that, Elaine.
Apologies. I'm
It's
just working on my laptop today, which is unbelievable, and I'm trying to flick to the correct area of the accounts.
That's
So-
why I like paper copies, Elaine, because I find it so much easier in these situations.
So, Convener, you talked about, quite rightly, about uncertainty around property valuations, and certainly there is uncertainty because of the pandemic, but the uncertainty is mainly because there's been less activity in the property market, and that means that valuers have less information on which they can form a basis of their opinion. So I would say that increasing, you know, we could look at increasing the range and number of revaluations, but that wouldn't necessarily mitigate the risk of improving sort of property valuations. In the event that a property asset has to be written down, even if it's to a significant level, there wouldn't be any impact on the council's financial position, and that's because the cost of any revaluation losses are reversed out so that there's no impact on the general fund. And that's known as statutory mitigation. It's in place to make sure that local taxpayers don't fund the impact of these basically paper-based losses. So in other words, in response to your question, if we do have to write down assets, it wouldn't affect the council's budget that we have available to spend on service provision.
Thank you, Elaine. That's very helpful. Thank you. Tom, you've got a question?
Thanks, Sandy. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, can hear you.
Yes.
Fine. Okay.
It was a question on page 81 and 82. On page 81, it was just to confirm that the underspend is it 27 million? And then on page 82, apparently the council last year got 76 million from the Scottish Government, and I think 29 million roughly of this has been carried forward into the current financial year. Could you confirm my understanding there? Yeah.
So the 71 million that we've received from Scottish Government is in relation to COVID funding, specifically,
Right.
Councillor Johnson. And yes, that's carried forward into 21-22, and it'll be fully reported in the COVID recovery budget.
There's 29 million of it being carried forward, COVID.
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct.
Right. Now, in page 100, I think it is, you get the list of all the Scottish Government grants there, or most of them. But there's one you mentioned for about 2.9 million. You've received 2.9 million, and I think nothing's been done with it yet. So there's nothing to report. I wanted some clarification on that sum of money. I think that's page 100 of the.
I'm not seeing it on page 100 of the pack today. Can you confirm that, Councillor Johnson?
Wait a minute now. It was a note about 2.9 million. Sorry, I haven't. Maybe I should have written this out more clearly. That's been received from the Scottish Government in grants that hasn't been touched. The other question I've got is on page 105 about the general uncertainty. It was about page 105. The Scottish Government was the managing authority for the EU structural funds, and there doesn't seem to be much clarification about what's going to happen there.
Okay, so first of all, your question in relation to the 2.9 million, Fiona, if that means anything to you, put your hand up. Otherwise, oh, that does good, because I'm not locating that, and then I'll come back on Councillor Johnson's question about EU funds if I just bring Fiona in at the moment.
What page was that on again? I hadn't made a note of the page.
Apologies, I don't have the pack, so I'm working on our accounts pages, so I'm completely out on page numbers, I'm afraid. It's on page 38 of the actual accounts, but obviously that'll be further on in the agenda pack. I'm afraid I don't know which number, but Elaine, it's the bottom of so this funding is funding that we've received. It's revenue grants, but where we've not been able to meet the grant conditions fully as yet, we're not able to recognise the income straight away. So it's where there's a potential that we could have to give the money back. There is no intention of that, and there's no likelihood of that really. It was just highlighting that we've received it in year, but we've not actually recognised it in the accounts as yet. It's held separately on the balance sheet. Once those conditions are met, it would be recognised through the accounts at that point in time when it becomes likely that we're not going to have to repay the grant funding, basically.
Right. Well, my concern is it's money that's been given to us, and hopefully we're using it rather than handing it back.
Yeah, I can certainly find. I can't remember off the top of my head what the details of the specific grants it was, but it's not likely that they would be given back. It's purely to make sure the accounting treatment is correct. If grants are given with conditions that we have to do a certain thing with that funding. If we haven't met those conditions yet, then we haven't been able to recognise that as yet. But what I can do is find the details of what specific grants they were, and give you a on the position. And your other question about the European funding, so there are two main streams. The European Regional Development Fund, there was a suspension on that, which was lifted in December 2020. So we had previously had accrued funding for that that had stopped being paid to us. That's now been lifted. But in relation to the European the ESF, I can't remember what it's specifically for, the European Social Fund, sorry. That one, the suspension, as far as we're aware, is still in place. COSLA had been liaising with Scottish Government to try and kind of get safeguarding in place where if ultimately those payments weren't going to be recoverable from the EU, that Scottish Government would underwrite that, but as far as we're aware, they haven't made any commitment on that at the moment. I do have figures for that. It's around 3.5 million within our balance sheet of accrued income that at the moment is potentially at risk, albeit we're not anticipating that it would actually we're anticipating that it will eventually be paid. It's likely more to be a cash flow issue, rather than that we don't think it's recoverable. If it got to the point where we felt that it wasn't recoverable, then we'd obviously need to change our accounting treatment to reflect that at that point in time. But the decision to continue to accrue that funding is based on our understanding that it will eventually be payable to us. Hope that answers your question.
Right, just through you, Chair, do you know which specific service that 2.9 million was allocated to? And my second,
Councillor Johnson, can I just come in and clarify? Fiona's making a point quite rightly that it refers to how we account for grants in terms of the accounting codes of practice. There's absolutely no intention that the council won't make best use of that money. It's just how we have to account for it at this stage. I've managed to locate it. It's page 109. Certainly, if it's something you want to go into any deeper, I'm happy to speak to you out with the meeting. But I think your question was really around concern that we weren't intending to use that money, and I can assure you that's certainly not the case.
okay, again through the Chair, on that question of the European structural funds, if that was to fall through, is this part of the new responsibility that's been taken over post-Brexit for the Westminster government, where they would provide funding, which used to come from Europe? Would it come under that development?
At this stage, it's a matter for Scottish Government. As Fiona explained,
Okay.
we do believe it's the intention of Scottish Government to reimburse councils, but we haven't had confirmation of that as yet, although we do think it will come. UK Government are looking at an alternative to EU funds, but this matter under discussion at the moment is a matter for Scottish Government.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
You okay with that, Tom? Right, thank you. Tracy?
Thanks, Sandy. In your overview, Elaine, you mentioned the equal pay claims, and that there's 5.6 million left, which should hopefully cover those claims. I was just wondering, do we know when that's likely to be completed, when all those claims will be dealt with and closed down? And also, another question just for my benefit, so sorry. You mentioned the contingency fund of 8 million. And an unallocated fund of 14.8 million, I think you said, which is a further buffer. I mean, I feel a wee bit slightly confused, because I'm thinking to myself, well, if it's unallocated, it's also a contingency. Just going to clarify exactly what those two things mean for me. Thank you.
Right, I will do, Councillor Carricker. Right, first of all, on equal pay, all claims that are known are included within the provision. However, claimants can decide whether or not to accept offers made, and where offers are rejected, they've also got potential to progress to a tribunal hearing, and the timing of that's out with the council's control. So I can't say with any certainty when we expect them to settle. In relation to your question about contingency, in some respects, you're absolutely right. We have an unallocated balance which is available for consideration for future use. However, we do maintain a contingency which the council absolutely does its best not to touch, because it is real, true emergency money. So although you're right, both elements are unallocated. The 8 million is the figure that we will not drop below. That's what we really need to hold. But 14.8 million remains unallocated at this stage.
Fine with that, Tracy? Good, thanks. Alan?
Thanks, Sandy. As you can see, probably I'm starting to have problems with my camera. However, I'd like to pay a compliment to Elaine and the team. First of all, to Elaine for an excellent summary of the salient points there, and equally for Elaine's team for helping Bon Weir's team and getting the business grants out the door, which is obviously essential in the COVID. They've done a fantastic job, simply the best. I would also extend that to Katrina as well and her team for all the work they've done in And they would also, it's a miracle that so many of the rags are green, given the backdrop of COVID. So everybody, well done. You've done a fantastic job.
Thanks, Alan. Are there any more questions? I've probably just got a couple just of exit packages, Elaine. Page 171. The figures are obviously for this year are well down on what they were the year previously. But there's a lot of media interest, and there has been in the past a lot of media interest on these exit packages. Can you maybe give us a bit of an explanation on how these decisions are made and how it pans out, and how we can be assured of the value for money in the way these packages are calculated? Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, so I would say that's really more of a question for HR colleagues, convener, and it might be worth a follow-up question after the meeting for a more detailed response than I can give you.
Yeah.
In terms of considering value for money, we do operate to a rule of thumb where severance costs that are to be incurred should be able to demonstrate at least a 3-year payback to the council. On saying that, sometimes there has to be flexibility applied to that rule of thumb because business needs have to be taken into account. Any decisions and payments that are scrutinised first of all by CMT and then ultimately through the council's workforce changes steering group. And I can say Financial Solutions also seek full information on potential one-off costs when savings proposals are put forward. So as far as exit packages are linked to savings, which is largely the case, they are considered and value for money is considered by Financial Solutions before the savings option is passed to bring forward to elected members.
Thanks, Elaine. This is going to be a very easy question for you to answer after all the difficult ones I've given you. But on page 123, we're looking at the cash and cash equivalent. And we seem to be running an overdraft of something like 9 million. But we also seem to be sitting on quite a lot of money in the likes of current accounts, although it depends what the split is between current accounts and call accounts. But I'm just wondering, with the likes of overdraft interest and everything, how the system works, that we need to run with overdrafts as well as having cash sitting perhaps in current accounts. Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, so that's not a particularly easy question. Again, it's a treasury management. It's a particularly complex area, but we don't tend to run on overdraft on a general basis. But what the accounts do is provide us a snapshot in time, if you like, and occasionally there is a position whereby when we use the council's own reserve, own balances, there shows an underspent position or an overdraft position. I'm probably not explaining this particularly clearly. I'm conscious of that. I don't know if Fiona would be able to put any further clarity on that, or again, if it's something that we'll come back to you on. I'm not going to throw Fiona under a bus, so I'll come back.
No, that's okay. I mean, I realise all these cash balances are very fluid between moving accounts and everything else. And a picture probably is taken at one particular day, and it can be totally distorted the next day. It was just when I saw it and thought to myself, well, obviously there's charges for running, overdrafts, and we're sitting probably with money in some cases on current account, perhaps, where we get nothing, so it was just.
I can reassure you that our treasury management team makes sure that we do everything with best value in mind at all times. Our strategy, our treasury management strategy is such that we absolutely minimise any costs to the council.
Thanks, Elaine. Have we got any more questions? Is everybody quite happy with the good explanations we received from everybody? That's fine. The recommendations for item 3 is number 1, to note the contents of the report and note the submission of the unaudited accounts to external audit by 30th of June 21. Is everybody happy with that? Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I think that probably brings the meeting to a close. Thank you very much, and really appreciate all the work that everybody's put into getting us where we are today, and we'll catch up in due course. Thank you. We'll see you later. Thanks very much.